Can we please go from Baraz exits? Baraz exits. And we're going to move into the factory and we're going to run the whole scene.
Stand by, everyone.
And you see him idling like that. Yeah. Push him back to work. Yeah, give him a kind of a push. Okay. Well, on the movement, when everyone moves, you need to lead that change. No, sort of scatter a bit. Yeah, scatter. Okay, Rafe, come down for me. Hug the back, Gracie, come down. Sulin, to your left, please. Sargon, to your right, please.
Ignition. 4, 3, 2, 1, lift off. The clock is running.
So to sum up how it all began is difficult because, A, it's 20 years ago, and B, a huge amount happened in a very short amount of time.
I am incredibly surprised that we have lasted 20 years.
I think it would be fair to say that for the first few years, I would not have put any money on original lasting certainly as long as it has, or not evolving into something else.
There was always a real energy and a real passion behind everything that they were producing, and you could kind of sense that, but there was always a real feeling of chaos.
Those first sort of 4 or 5 years when I look back on them, it was just sort of disaster after disaster.
There are so many times where I think this company could have gone, okay, do you know what, that's it, we can't manage.
Someone else would have just dropped the whole thing at show 2 of his first production.
There was a lot of winging it, borrowing resources here, there, a lot of goodwill from actors, but I certainly don't think many people thought that this was sustainable.
If that model had continued, I would be angry that they were still around. But he changed the model.
He's a survivor, he proved that.
Of course, theatre never works in straight lines.
Alistair is the cat with 9 lives, and he will always land on his feet.
Kind of disaster doesn't probably freak me out in the way that it used to. Maybe you just become kind of battle-hardened.
20 years on from coming up with the idea of original theatre, I feel, if anything, we have now kind of got ourselves where a model that exists, at least in this moment, which is sustainable enough for us to actually be original. So we're here now, back in the garden of my mum and dad's house, which is in Wepstead, a little village about 4 miles out of Bury St Edmunds. And it was here on a very autumnal feeling day back in the summer of 2005 that we did our very, very, very first show. I'd like to say it was sort of to a public audience, but it was probably to like my mum and dad's friends. And it was 12th night once again, and it was done exactly here. I was here watching it with one of my mum and dad's friends who was much more interested in the weather, a bit like today, but much worse. And there was a storm, like this lightning storm, that was circling the performance. And then Malvolio's got this line, "I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you." And as he did that line, a bolt of lightning, which feels like it must be a false memory, but I spoke to someone and they remembered it too, hit the bottom of this wooden set, like from the sky, gasps from the audience. And then at the end of the play, you've got Feste who sings, "And the rain it raineth every day." And as he sung that first line, the heavens just opened, and I was stood exactly here, and I just watched the entire audience empty immediately, just darted to their cars. And that was it, and that was the end of the first show. No applause, nothing, just sort of drama. We were upstaged by the weather. I set up the company 20 years ago. It was 2004. I'd just kind of come home from my second year at university, and I remember that at the university there was a show that got put on every year, and I had this idea to do 12th Night, and was really upset when they went with someone else because they said I'd be absolutely a catastrophe with any kind of thing involving money. And I was so annoyed by this that I sort of decided that I was going to do my own production anyway. And that became this 22 venue national tour. And that show was a complete disaster. in every possible way.
So I saw the very first original show, which was an outdoor production of Twelfth Night. I think I saw it in a field in Haywards Heath in West Sussex.
It was a beautiful show, and bright and sunny and happy, but it was stuck together with tape.
You know, that tour was absolutely nuts, I think, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
I mean, the guy who'd been playing Malvolio before I came in allegedly was getting stoned, like so stoned that he didn't know where he was before he went on stage.
I was truly the worst producer that, you know, anyone has ever conceived of.
We'd have a show in Devon, and then like a show in Leeds the next day, and then a show in Devon the day after. And people were like, do we have to go to Leeds and then come back to Devon? Can we not do it the other way around?
And so it was a brutal awakening.
God, it was fucking terrible. Like it was incredible, but it was fucking. I think the thing that pissed me off the most was we just didn't get paid. I didn't even ask about the money. I think when the call came, I was just like, yeah, acting work, yeah, great, I'll do it, fine.
Instead of going bankrupt, which is what everyone said I should do, again, this stubborn streak said, no, I'm going to sort of, you know, make this good. Paid everyone off, which took 7 or 8 years, but kept going, and we just did one show a year for the next 3 or 4 years. Just purely at that point, outdoor theatre. So we're here in the middle of Bury St Edmunds, under the gateway to the Abbey Gardens, which is the first venue, or our second venue, we ever performed in. And this is how the audience would have arrived, through this sort of magnificent arch, much better set than anything we could provide. And it was then behind us, about 150 metres down here, that we'd put on our very first productions back in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. Just along this little avenue of trees and bushes where we first did our production of Twelfth Night back in the July of 2005. And we subsequently came back over 4 successive years doing Twelfth Night, Taming of the Shrew, Midsummer Night's Dream, and ultimately Shakespeare's R&J, which is the show where I met Tom.
I started off with the company as an actor back in 2008. I find this very hard to believe, but I was a very dashing Juliet.
Romeo. Romeo. Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
I was a little less beardy then. Actually, I performed in the gardens just through there, probably all of about 30, 35 people in the pouring rain.
So this is the garden where we did two. So you say that we did R&J up here?
We did, because I remember the concrete, because it blooming hurt during the fight scenes.
And Taming of the Shrew we did at that end, behind these Trivial Pursuits, still up after 19 odd years, is probably the only surviving poster of this show that we did in the garden here. It's probably the second or third venue. It says here on the 27th of June, 2006.
I'm not sure if I should name the actor, but one of the lovely actors who was in it, who was Fight Master Emeritus, and he was responsible for the injury of every member of the cast. I think he gave one of the actors nerve damage. I think it was either here or one of the other venues where he stage kicked me in the ribs, but actually nearly broke my ribs.
In our head, it's outdoors, it's really big, but actually they're tiny.
It's tiny.
It's like we probably have 50 people in here. But an amazing sort of, that's Constable Country in the background, that kind of backdrop, and then this beautiful pub there. Sort of pretty cool place to do it.
Should we do it again?
No. But yeah, so this was we only did it twice, this pub, but people still talk about it. It was around that Shakespeare's R&J as we went inside. We went from outdoor theatre to indoor theatre, and we no longer had to rely on the British summertime to sort of make sure we kind of could break even.
I first met Original in 2010 when I auditioned for Journey's End, and I went in to be stand-up. And this very young guy, who I imagined was either the casting director or something, was reading in for Raleigh, but went for it, all guns blazing. And we were in there for about an hour and a half, you know, and he was full on, tears, snot, throwing things, everything. So I didn't realise that was the actor I'd be working with. And then who turned into the producer that is Tom Hackney. And I think I was probably a little bit miffed that I was being upstaged and out-acted by the producer. And later on, I found out I got the job as I walked in. What? Then why did you drag me through 90 minutes of Tom Hackney hell? Like, he went through blood, sweat and tears to get me that role. He really threw himself into it.
So 2010, we did The Madness of George III by Alan Bennett, which starred Simon Ward, huge actor back in the 70s, 80s, an amazing actor. Susie Penhaligon was in it, playing the King and the Queen. And it was the worst thing I've ever directed.
I feel like I've blocked quite a lot of it.
I was both in it, producing it, and directing it, or trying to, and failing on all three really quite badly.
I don't know whether it was cursed or whether there weren't at that point measures put in place in order to avert disaster, which seemed to happen on a kind of daily basis.
We tried to clothe it and costume it on the cheap, which that was a mistake.
One of the design concepts was this like paper mache cardboard wig. It was really heavy. I can remember that the costume designer had to bring in like 20 of her friends. It was like the Tale of Gloucester. They were like sewing until 3 minutes before we went on to do the show. I think basically they had designed this very elaborate show thinking it was going to be this step up for original theatre, and they just hadn't got the capacity to make it work.
Had its Scottish premiere at Perth Theatre. It was playing a 2-week run, and they rolled out the red carpet for it. You know, it was a big deal, Alan Bennett show, and all the great and the good of Perth and all the Scottish press came. So we got in on the night that we were going to open, and then all the cast arrived at sort of 4 o'clock expecting to go on stage, and they were still rigging the lights. Nothing was ready. The set was sort of falling over. This show opened an hour and a half late, and the lighting was non-existent. It was just dark for the whole thing.
It felt like a sitcom, like someone was filming us, and that it wasn't the reality.
The audience was actually angry. You know, you could feel it. They were tired, and the show was bad, really, really bad.
I could not stop corpsing. I was playing a servant as well, so we had to stand there like straight-faced, trying not to upstage anybody, which we inevitably did. It was ludicrous.
And the Scottish press properly went for me. Susie Penhaligon sat me down and she said, "Darling, it's okay to fail." At the time I didn't want to hear that because I didn't want to admit that I'd failed. This was sort of, the day after those reviews landed. But I still speak to her about it. I think that was a really nice lesson that she sort of gave me that day, which is that's what artists and people that make things, you've got to get things wrong. That's how you learn to make them better. In 2012, we did a production of Our Country's Good, just before we had done a production of See How They Run and 12th Night. Quite good productions, but they're big cast, 12 people in them. No one has ever twinned them before and done them in a double bill, and nobody will ever do it again. And we toured it through the autumn, and I couldn't book the thing. No one wanted both of these shows. They really didn't sell. We lost an absolute fortune. And then we were mounting Our Country's Good, which is again a big cast and a tough sell. And the money had run out.
We had some investment and it all just fell through incredibly late, and we kept thinking we were going to get some funding or something. All of the bridges that we thought we'd set up just kept falling one by one.
Quite soon into the rehearsal period, there was a sense that behind the scenes perhaps there was something a little bit off.
I've got at best a week left of rehearsals, and then unless I can find a magic pot of money, it's all going to fall apart.
I think Alistair actually stayed at mine over Christmas, but kind of seemed to lock himself in a room. And I remember going up, actually knocking on the door going, "Mum says I need to give you some sandwiches because she thinks you're going to top yourself." It's like, topping myself? I'm trying to save my company!
I think Alistair had gone ahead with cracking on with rehearsals, but not actually knowing whether this production was even going to get up on stage.
I would like to think this is exaggerated in the retelling of it, but it actually happened like this. It was Friday. I knew at the end of that day we would be able to pay the actors for that week, and that was the last of the money. So at 5:30 I was going to rehearse for the day and then say,
sadly, the tour can't go ahead.
And the company's going bankrupt. And at 5 o'clock my phone was like buzzing, and there was a voice message, and it was from a lady that didn't really introduce herself, but she just did say something about a pigeon that was flying across London on a mission to drop something, a package in East London, and left the number of her accountant. Can I call this person?
One of Alistair's many, many thousands of phone calls he probably made over that period was to Lady Susie Sainsbury.
And then this accountant said, yeah, Susie Sainsbury's put in £20,000.
Looked down at the bottom, and there we had a cheque.
And it is just quite shocking that none of us had a clue that he was under that kind of tension. No stress on Alistair's face at all, so to his everlasting credit, or his everlasting psychosis, whichever way you want to look at it.
So that was kind of an extraordinary moment of the company at one of its lowest points, and was that close to it all kind of falling apart.
I like pickled onions, I like piccalilli, pickled cabbage is alright with a bit of cold meat on a Sunday night. I can go tomatoes is but what I do prefer is a little bit of cucumber, is a little bit of cucumber.
So those are the years 2012, 2018, and in the gap of those 6 years, the two shows that we basically did repeatedly were Birdsong and Three Men in a Boat. One was a big touring show that toured to the biggest theatres in the country. One was more fleet-footed. Tom and I were in it, and it sort of played the mid-scale venues.
So I met Original Theatre in 2012. I think I received an email from my agent saying a small theatre company was interested in doing a new production of Birdsong. And it had been difficult in the West End. The production had been very impressive, but for whatever reason the script hadn't quite worked. And it hadn't really landed as I'd hoped it might. And then sitting there in Basingstoke on the first preview, watching Alistair's production, and I just saw all these people crying. And then I started crying because I was just so relieved that it worked.
I went to Birdsong hoping it would be wonderful, and it was wonderful. And I spoke to Alistair afterwards, and I thought, well, he's definitely grounded and matured. And I worked with a couple of people. I worked with a lighting guy who'd worked with him. I worked with a couple of actors over a short space of time. And they all said, oh, he's great. And he's really looking after his actors, and he pays us properly, and he cares. And he refers back to that first tour, people told me. And he still uses it as a sort of lesson as to how not to go about things.
We used to do these things, we had two things, one called Original Reads and one called Original Labs. And the Reads is when we just get a cast together and we read a play, and the Labs was about developing a script. So it was probably 2015 when we were doing an original read of Invincible, and it went down an absolute storm, and there and then on the night, Alistair said, we're going to put this on.
So Invincible was played by Torben Betts, really funny play about the North-South divide. It had real sort of zip and politics, but was, brilliantly funny. Play for 4 actors, and I thought this could work.
Invincible wasn't just, as it started out, another classic sort of fly by the seat of your pants production.
And there were all sorts of bumps on the road to actually making it happen. One of which, the most sizable, was perhaps the fact that we rehearsed in a disused Argos in Bury St Edmunds, which was freezing cold.
Alistair was in that production, but clearly quite distracted. The company was in financial trouble again.
Once again, we had no money, and the Arts Council had said no twice. And then we kicked up a fuss, went in to see them. And the only time this has ever happened, they changed their mind.
We all really celebrated that with Alistair because we all really believed in it and knew it was worth doing.
I think it was exactly what Original needed at the time as well.
Audiences absolutely loved it. Roll on a year later, and we're taking it to New York. We got to the Brits Off Broadway Festival. So, if you told me, 1 minute we're rehearsing in this disused shopping centre in Bury St Edmunds, and the next minute we're off Broadway. With this production. Again, it feels like that is a very classic Original trajectory.
Watch this space, but I think we might be on the verge of something quite extraordinary.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
For any particular timing, that was probably the worst time for us as a company for lockdown to hit. So we had a brand new play called The Croft, and we had The Habit of Art, one show that had reached its dress rehearsal, so it had spent all its money. And we had one show that had yet to recoup any money that was needing the next leg of its tour. So effectively, all the cards were in.
And literally, as we said, overnight, on the Monday night, everything stopped. We realised all our shows were cancelled, and that's all our income.
I think it's the one time we had to call up the actors and go, look, we cannot pay you at the end of this week.
I think we had like £7,000 left in the account because we'd spent all the money opening this show, over £100,000. And obviously then the box office just shut, the theatre shut, so we had nothing, we couldn't get any of that money back. And I thought, okay, well, let's see what we can do with that little bit of money. Maybe we'll just, furlough, and we'll mothball the company, and we'll come back in a year's time. I've always wanted a holiday.
Maybe I should have taken you to that travel lodge in Hitchin.
I got a phone call from Emma Martin, and she was basically putting out an SOS.
Can you get down to Croydon and Eastbourne tomorrow to film these 2 shows?
It was very much like the last helicopter out of Saigon. I bundled together a team of filmmakers, and we hit the deserted roads of the UK.
And we had never filmed a show, and we had no platform, no way of sharing it. We had no contracts in place, we had no agreements.
Are you absolutely mad? Like, at a moment when the industry is crumbling, you're thinking of a new business venture.
If we didn't film them, then nothing could happen. I thought if we got them in the can, we might be able to do something. We had no audience, no ways of selling this, and we had to sort of do all that within a week.
Yeah.
Emma then built this platform or a website which had a mechanism to take money. We'd never taken money ourselves before, so we'd no means of doing that. And literally a week after filming it, we released The Habit of Art for £2.50. Unbelievable now that we released it for £2.50.
Plays. They don't so much go into production as into intensive care.
I'm not sure that any of us had really given it much forethought as anything other than a record of the production. But it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that this was going to be a piece of work in its own right.
Our biggest successes as a company have always hands down been when our back's against the wall, and I think probably the crown jewel of all that was the pandemic.
Original decided that we would just see if we could make money and what we could do, and it was terrifying and incredibly stressful at many points. But to be able to think that we could still create our work and have kind of a purpose in this time. I, was living alone and doing my garden otherwise.
We weren't being truly original or sort of trying to be provocateurs or trying to push the envelope. We were just trying to survive.
And then maybe 2 weeks later, Alistair gives me a call. He wants to do a reading of Birdsong.
As a Zoom reading?
We did a rehearsal of this reading, which was a total disaster. And myself and Dom Bilkey, who was doing sound, said it was impossible to do it and that we needed to film it all on iPhone with little plug-in mics, send all the equipment to the actors, give them green screens and do all the backgrounds at home. The actors would film themselves on their phones while interacting on Zoom so they could hear one another, and then they'd load all of their clips into Dropbox and I would cut them together on the other end. It was just kind of a miracle. It got made. I had so little time that I didn't even have time to watch it back before I had to send it over to get up on the streaming platform.
It was an extraordinary success, except for the fact that we could only release it for 3 days because the film company had residual rights for it. Just as it was beginning to take off with sales, again, we had to pull it. So we had to keep going.
I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. You've been saying that for years.
So I'm not going to lie, when he told me he was going to film Apollo 13 in people's homes.
And do zero gravity in people's bedrooms.
And I thought he was mad. I can picture sitting on my bed and listening to him tell me that and being like, this isn't going to work.
We'd lie the green screen on the floor and the actors would lie on a stool, and we had a movement director, Simon. He helped them with their movements, key out the green screen and rotate them in post and rotate the green screen the other way, and it kind of gave them this floaty, zero gravity feeling. It was quite like 1980s Bollywood.
Throughout the shoot, we never met. We were always in bedrooms across the country. I had my double bed folded up every morning up against the wall and a green screen dropped down behind me, and then I was filming and hearing Tristan talking about all these different codes of lighting levels and can you alter this and alter that. I mean, it was a technical nightmare. The real secret, I think, was how good the post-production was. And I know when Michael and Tom and I saw it, we were texting each other with, oh my God, this is really good.
Jesus Christ, what the hell was that? No idea.
We just kept on going. We adapted to the world as it was sort of happening. Shows filmed at theatres but without audiences. We combined the two. We went to live streaming.
You know, we got nominated for all sorts of awards. People were talking about it. You know, they weren't just tacky shots of people stuck in front of a bed sheet reading from a script. They were imaginative and exciting. And I think that upped Original's profile.
It was a way of connecting with our audiences again, finding audiences. We grew our newsletter and following from like 3,000 people to 30,000 over the last few years. So people started to know who we were as a company and cared about the work, despite the fact we couldn't be on their stages.
Look at you in the telly. What you doing in the telly?
And then we came out of lockdown with this platform and a reputation for making digital work, and then explored how we could marry that digital work with live work and how one could perhaps possibly feed the other.
For a while, the industry beforehand, everybody was in their box. You're the touring guys. I think it kind of broke down some barriers. By the time theatres opened back up, it meant that we were able to take more risks commercially in a way that I don't think we would have done before.
We could do a play like The Interview about the Bashir Diana interview, which we'd never normally have been able to do, but the digital gives it a financial hope of success and recoupment. We're never going to make thousands, tens of thousands of pounds, but we might break even with them, which allows these new plays to exist.
If this comes off, it'll be absolutely massive.
We've arrived 20 years after I originally founded this company. We're here in 2024. We've basically done nearly everything that we set out to do. We had shows that have played in New York. We've toured to nearly every theatre in the country. We've built a reputation. And the question, I suppose, is what do we do now?
Success and the future of where they go to next has been how they've embraced digital and the relationship and the interplay between digital theatre and people being able to stream high-class theatre in their own homes with still having a really exciting live theatre offering.
Theatre shouldn't just be for people who can get to the theatre and pay the money it costs you. If you've got a large family, you want to see family theatre, you often can't. And we have a huge number of people on our platform that use theatre online because they need it for accessible reasons, or because they can't leave the house anymore, or because for so many things. And art should be for everyone. Everyone should be able to access it. Everyone should be able to afford it.
I think the fact that they built this platform from scratch during the COVID pandemic, the fact that they've been willing to take some risks, the fact that they've been able to attract, you know, some of the most extraordinary actors of stage and screen to come and be involved in some quite experimental approaches to digital theatre shows that they are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And I think there's a really long way that they can go with that.
Original now is this sort of beast. It's quite a large entity, and with, as far as I'm aware, no Arts Council money. I mean, it's a flipping miracle what he's done.
I think the dream has always been to grow and be innovative, but they've been really persistent and building up a brand that people across the country recognise. And I think that is really important. And they also are now co-producing more and more, and I think that they are now looking like the wise heads or experienced companies with new shows, rather than just having to sort of beg, borrow and steal to make it happen. They're now becoming, you know, the institution themselves, the establishment themselves.
They've gone from being a smaller touring theatre company to now being one of the best in the country.
I really see no reason why they can't go on and on. Alistair and Tom show no sign of slacking off or losing their enthusiasm or interest or their energy. I think they've got the will and the eccentricity and the resilience to survive.
If lockdown and anything taught us anything, it was that the bolder you are, you reap the rewards of that. Caveat all that by going, we'll probably end up bankrupting ourselves again in the process. But we will certainly look to try and be both populist, but also discover those new writers, the great actors of the tomorrow, and be the people that stage those plays first, and continue to explore this digital world and where that might go.
Maybe we can have a break when we get to 50. I'll ask him. Maybe I'll be allowed to go on holiday. Finish this pint when we turn 50.
The bells are ringing inside the Salisbury Playhouse because tonight, after months, if not years of work, our opening preview of Birdsong, the adaptation of Sebastian Faulks' epic novel, is opening here. So we've got a sold-out house. The audience are coming in and making their way in, and it's a show that's been arguably 10 years in the making. We've done 5 different productions. We've done an online film, and this is the one that we hope will be the one that will take us all the way to who knows where. This is a production that we first started in 2013, our first big show, our first big tour. From doing mid-scale theatre to sort of sub 500 seats, we shot up into doing bigger shows. And now, in 2024, 11 years on from that, we're now opening tonight to an audience this show that we hope people are going to like. First night of Birdsong. Got a park bench for where it begins, creatives on the back row, and hope the actors remember their lines, don't walk into the wallpaper, and the people like it. Here we go.
Original theatre. It's an ambitious title.
Here we go. Original theatre is a special family, and that's what makes them unique.
They're an absolutely lovely company to work for. I mean, they are original in many ways.
Nothing can prepare us for the reality of something that is truly new.
I don't think there's another theatre company out there like the Original Theatre.
Artistically confident and integrity-full young company punching above its weight.
I mean, if you're going to do it, why not do it right?
Exactly, yeah.
Original theatre is like making work with friends.
Original theatre seems brimming with ideas and energy.
They're nimble and swift and they get stuff done. A lot of really special memories.
To your health, yes, and yours.
A very warm, happy congratulations to Original Theatre's 20th birthday!
Happy birthday, Original Theatre!
Happy birthday, Original, 20 years of theatre, and here's to 20 more.
Happy 20th birthday, Original Theatre.
Happy, happy birthday.
Many happy returns.
Cheers. I hope you have a wonderful birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Original Theatre.
And congratulations.
Happy birthday, Original Theatre.
Happy birthday, Original Theatre.
To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance.